Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. My name is Ben Duzing. I'm a Georgetown University graduate from the School of Foreign Service, class of 1997, Hoya Saxa. I am asking for your help in helping me make this very special contribution that I can make to the relief efforts in Ukraine, the humanitarian efforts for the people of Ukraine. I am uniquely in a position, as I will explain, to make a contribution. I have felt called to do this. I am trying to get on the ground in Ukraine as quickly as possible. It will be my 4th trip to Ukraine since the war broke out. And in working with a number of foreign volunteers from all over the world, such as myself, who are uniquely in a position to really make a big difference over there, we are trying to make that difference. So I would ask that you prayerfully consider supporting my efforts by donating to the GoFundMe account that is attached to this, the link to which is attached to this post. I want to explain as briefly as I can, but there's a little bit of backstory here that's relevant. As briefly as I can, why I am so uniquely in a position to make the difference that I can, and why I feel so strongly about the moral imperative to make it, why I feel that moral imperative. So, there are 2 things that must be understood. The first is that the organizations that typically handle these situations cannot, have not, and won't. The reasons for that are way too long to explain in this video, but that must be understood. And if you don't believe me, talk to anybody who's been associated with the relief efforts or any Ukrainian on the ground over there. The humanitarian effort for the people of Ukraine is overwhelmingly the backbone. I saw an article the other day that said the backbone. I think it's a little more than the backbone, but whatever, is foreign volunteers such as myself who have who arrange for these things to happen. Why that is, how that is, as scary as that is, I don't have time to explain. There are reasons for that, but this is a very unique circumstance that has occurred, and there's no blueprint for it. The people who usually handle this don't. Premise 1. Premise 2. Because of the unique nature of what's going on over there, the need for humanitarian aid is commensurately extreme. The reason for this overwhelmingly is that this is a different war that is being fought, as you know, way different than any other war in the past. There are always civilian casualties when a war is waged, particularly in the middle of civilization in Europe. But there is a difference between no civilian casualties and just indiscriminately shelling villages where there is a maximum. We haven't done that before, and that's what's going on. Meaning that the number of civilians affected by this, the number of refugees, 30% more than the UN worst case estimate at the outset, 1 in 2 being a child. The number of aid, the number of evacuations, all of that is dramatically in the extreme, like we've never seen before. So what we have here is a humanitarian catastrophe. And this has not been reported to the extent, it hasn't been captured really in the mainstream press. And I understand that. The press hasn't been able to get as close as they normally do for the very reason I just mentioned. We have a humanitarian catastrophe. We have a situation where for the first time in modern history, the organizations which exist, the Red Cross, UNICEF, that kind of thing, the international NGOs who exist for the purpose of handling these situations cannot, will not, and won't. Haven't been. On the one hand, and on, well, premise 1. Premise 2, the extent to which the civilian population is being affected by this kind of war is in the extreme, and therefore the need for humanitarian assistance is also unprecedented. What this has meant is that there is an enormous humanitarian void that has had to be filled, believe it or not, by a network of foreign volunteers comprised of people like me. Let me explain kind of how I came to be in the position that I'm in. First of all, I studied the Russian language on the hilltop at Georgetown, and obviously speak conversant Russian. I wouldn't say I'm fluent, but I can do everything that needs to be done from a humanitarian perspective. That is a very useful language to know in this circumstance. Sure, the Russians don't know. The eastern half of Ukraine, Russian's the first language for a lot of those folks. In the western half, they hate speaking it. The entire former communist Soviet bloc, of course, hates the Russians and hates the Russian language, since it was force-fed to them during the entire Cold War period. Nonetheless, they are more than willing to speak the language, and can if they're over the age of, say, 25 or 30. And so people like me that speak Russian, it's even more valuable than being able to speak Ukrainian, which Ukrainian people can certainly appreciate, but is really limited to that country. The Poles, begrudgingly speak Russian. The Ukrainians begrudgingly speak Russian, and so does everyone else in the former Soviet bloc. So I speak Russian. I've lived there twice. Once when I was at Georgetown for a summer in St. Petersburg, I had my appendix removed in military hospital number 20. I wouldn't recommend that. That was my Georgetown classmate, Brian Gerardo. His family arranged for Doctors Without Borders to come visit me when I was in the hospital. It was a very good gesture and needed, frankly. And I'm fine. I took a year off after I graduated from Georgetown and before I went to law school at the University of Kentucky to live and work in Moscow, Russia. So, and over the years, I've stayed in contact the way one stays in contact with people that he meets and experience, having that kind of background. Been there many times. Most recently before the war broke out for the World Cup in Russia a couple years ago. So against that backdrop, as the war broke out and as I had life events occur, I worked for myself here. I suddenly found, I have some time on my hands. I could, set my own schedule. I'm a divorced father of 4. As the war broke out, I perceived that these things were happening. On the one hand, maximum humanitarian need. On the other, the people who usually step into this, handle this stuff, not doing it. And I felt strangely called to go over and help with the refugee effort at the border. I didn't know for sure that I would be especially helpful, but something told me that people like me would be. I went over and immediately understood that I was correct, and immediately understood that it was vitally important that people like myself from all over the world step into this humanitarian void and do what they can, because if not, the Ukrainian people pouring across the border, at that time, millions, thousands every day, would not receive even the basic humanitarian assistance that they so desperately needed. I went to Medyka, Poland. Medyka is a small, quaint Polish border town that just happened to be one of the places where one of the 8 border crossings on the Ukrainian-Polish border was located. It happened to be the only one that had a pedestrian crossing. And since refugees typically don't roll up to the border, in cars, what this meant was that Medyka, Poland, a place that was not at all suited to be the epicenter of the worst refugee crisis in Europe since World War II, which is what it was. It became that epicenter, the busiest border crossing. People from all over the world, like myself, perceiving what was going on, went over with a hunch that we could be helpful, found out that we were not just extremely helpful, but necessary. If not us, then no one. And we foreign volunteers, an unofficial assembly, nobody could be in charge. We were squatting on municipal property right up against the border. People setting up tents, setting up fledgling organizations, or using organizations that really had no relevance to humanitarian efforts, but just using those to get over there and assemble people. Setting up tents right there on the path leading up from the gates to the main road where the buses took the refugees away to their next stop so they could be registered and resettled. We just showed up. I showed up. I went over 3 weeks into the war, and the place was already humming. By a very strange coincidence of fate, namely, my daughter had read on the internet that one of the things that they needed over there, since I had extra space in my luggage, was costumes, kids' costumes that adults could wear, because the refugee children, this was all women and children, all the refugees were women and children. The men chose to stay and fight in Ukraine, and even if they didn't choose that, they had to. It was martial law. It really helped the kids. I am kind of a goofy, crazy dad. I have tons of costumes. I grabbed one. It happened to be a chicken suit, and I put it in my bag. I had no intention of wearing it over there. I was just trying to give it to whoever I thought was maybe in charge a little bit of that kind of thing. As it turned out, when the volunteers already on the ground when I arrived saw that I had that, they understood that would help out a lot. They told me to put it on, get some candy, head out front. Long story short, within 6 hours of arriving in Medica, I was performing a role that didn't exist prior to my arrival, didn't exist after I left, and that was a role I uniquely played and also suited my personality and my constitution perfectly. And it was as the mascot of Medica, the cheerleader of Medica. I was the greeter and welcomer. I was literally the tip of the spear, the first person to meet these refugee families coming across the border in wave after wave. The only person to see them unfiltered and raw. I mean, they weren't much better after they left me, so the rest of the volunteers certainly saw human suffering on a level that they had never seen before. But these people were collapsing into my arms, crying uncontrollably in my arms. These people who had experienced inhumanity. I was the first face of humanity, and as soon as they saw that I was a human and my costume helped, when I was there the first time, I had a chicken costume. I had bought a ticket already to go back home. I didn't know when I went if I could be useful. As soon as I got back home, I bought a ticket to come back. I came at the beginning of April to stay for 2 weeks. I didn't leave until May. And I bought a bunny costume, which was a much better costume than a chicken costume, especially since it was Easter. And so I was the first face of humanity that these people saw. They collapsed into my arms. They needed to. They had just arrived at the end of one epic journey. They had arrived to safety, the safety of Western civilization. They were submitting themselves to the promise of help, which they desperately needed. Didn't speak the language, didn't have a job, didn't have a place to live, all that stuff. Nothing. And I was that first face of humanity. And these people collapsed into my arms. I cried with them for hours. Depending on the border guards, I would walk out and help the elderly who were struggling to make it down the home stretch there, come in. They would tell me the worst things I've ever heard. I just chalked it up to the limitations of my Russian language ability, that the things that they were telling me couldn't really be true. I had to be missing something. I heard about things like filtration camps and the atrocities that we now know occurred way before they were reported in the mainstream press, and really way before anybody knew about those. I just chalked it up to my limitations of my Russian. These were deeply powerful experiences that impacted me deeply, as I think they would anybody, and in the end changed my life. I developed a very close connection to these people, as you would understand, someone probably would. I will never forget the faces, I will never forget the names, I will never forget what I was told. There were good moments. The children would see Ben the Bunny, as I was called, the Yaitzik in Russian, the bunny. The Pink Bunny, or Ben the Bunny. I don't think anybody knows my last name there, but everybody knew Ben the Bunny because I was pink and the only one in a pink bunny costume in a refugee camp. And because of that visibility, because of that unique role, because of the unofficial nature of everything, just organizations and individuals, foreign volunteers from all over the world coming there and working together, no systemic anything, not even a planned community, just people setting up tents right there on the path from which they could hand out food, hand out water, provide medical examinations, that kind of thing. And setting up tents behind the tents in which they could live. So a veritable tent village. Think humanitarian Woodstock. Ben the Pink Bunny was the easiest way to route information. The volunteers cycled out and they were replaced by somebody, and that group was working with this other group. It was collaboration all the time. A beautiful thing. People working across languages and cultures and nationalities for one singular purpose, to help the least of their brothers and sisters in a moment of need. A very beautiful thing. The easiest way to connect people was just find Ben the Pink Bunny and he'll show you who that is or what that is. Which is why I found it necessary to stay in state Without knowing it, without intending it, I found myself at the epicenter of this effort, and I stayed as long as I could. When I left, I slept for like 4 days. This was difficult work. It was important work. And I understood that if we didn't do it, it wasn't going to get done. I felt called in a way that I've never felt called before, to be a part of it, to do everything that I could do to help. And these other foreign volunteers from around the world felt the same way. And again, without intending it or knowing it, over the course of my time in Medica, the border, I developed the contacts, the networks, the knowledge, especially important institutional knowledge, with an effort that was absolutely entirely unofficial. Nothing's written down. Nothing could be written down. No policies and procedures. So to have someone with the institutional knowledge is really important. And humanitarian skills that I didn't even know you could have, that I acquired and honed over my time there. Being in a position to be at the intersection of everything and to have a perspective on things that could contribute insight that perhaps others could not. When I went home, it was my intention at that point to host a family. That was going to be my contribution for the rest of the war. I had met, rather strangely and coincidentally, a particular refugee my first time there, my friend Hannah, a 27-year-old sophisticated professional who had lived abroad, who was in Medica working as part of a journalistic crew as a translator. She had arrived weeks before I got there. We met, exchanged information. You don't exchange information in these places. It was a very chance encounter. Hannah and I kept in contact. After I left, she went back to Kyiv to help her family, the men in her family fighting on the front, to help her family, to help her people. She became a very important resource, and she too understood that the only aid that was reaching the ground, that was helping her people, was the aid that was being provided by the network of unofficial foreign volunteers such as myself. And so we began collaborating on projects. I went to get Hannah. Didn't seem like a nice thing to do, to ask her to travel through a war zone the third time to get to the United States. So I went there to escort her back, and also so that we could go out into the provinces, these places that had been occupied by the Russians and where ghastly, devastating things had occurred. The Russians had by then pulled out to reconcentrate their forces in the east. And we visited these populations. We spoke to these people. Hannah had special access to them because she was part of this journalistic team. We walked in flats that were hit by Russian shells. We talked to their owners. And we went to these places like Irpin and Bucha and Ostabel and Borodianka and confirmed what we already knew, which was that there was no aid reaching these places. And these places were places where the world knew horrible things happened. If no aid is getting there, there's definitely no aid getting to these remote villages, all of which had been systematically destroyed by the Russians. We began collaborating on projects. Hannah came back and stayed with me for 2 months. All hell broke loose in Ukraine again. She felt like her family needed her help. The people, her people there needed her help. She went back. She's a very bad refugee. Every time she escapes to safety, she goes back because she just can't not help. She's a fabulous person and a very good friend. Since that time, I have, from the United States, unofficially sponsored various families that I came to know, refugees that had special circumstances, who have been resettled to different places. They don't really know how to do things like set up bank accounts and get apartments and that kind of thing. This network of foreign volunteers like myself unofficially sponsors these people and just helps them out however possible, funding them when necessary, helping them learn the skills that they need to learn. I have assisted from afar my foreign volunteers as one by one, they have realized that at this stage, the people who are in Ukraine who can get out have gotten out. The refugee part is largely over. It is about getting aid to the people in these places that continue to be decimated and it cannot get out. And getting the aid, what that means is getting the aid, getting humanitarian aid to the east and the south. And getting those people the hell out of there. So-called aid running and evacuations. One by one, my network of foreign volunteers has gone back, and all of those people more or less at this point are either back, and I've been doing my best to support them from here, or they're on their way. I am uniquely in a position to assist. The level of demand for getting aid where it needs to get and getting people the hell out of these areas. This is not being done except for by this unofficial network of foreign volunteers, such as myself, as a matter of conscience, as a matter of faith, as a matter of principle. I simply cannot stand on the sideline and not make the difference that I know I can make. And I feel called, as a matter of conscience, as a matter of faith, as a matter of principle, to go do that. I have hurriedly put my organization together. I am taking some manpower under my employ, and we will be getting some trucks in Ukraine and working with the foreign volunteers already on the ground over there to do what needs to be done. Again, running aid all over Ukraine, hotspots like Kharkiv and Kherson and Odessa, and virtually every city along the Donbas front. And we will be running aid to those places and bringing the civilian wounded and those who, if they stay, are eventually going to be wounded, which is everybody, the hell out of there. The demand for this kind of thing cannot be overstated. Just to give you an example, just yesterday I got word from my foreign volunteer friends who were already there in a city called Zaporizhzhia. I'm mispronouncing that, but it's been in the news a lot recently. Every day, 1,000 to 1,500, this has long been kind of the current evacuation point just off of the front line. Every day, 1,000 to 1,500 people arrive there that need to be evacuated. There are trains running in Ukraine, but there's only 3 carriages set aside. Not nearly enough to handle the demand. These loose networks of foreign volunteers like myself are coming in and evacuating these people, just taking them wherever they need to go, to other places in Ukraine, in some cases to Poland. If people like us don't do it, it doesn't get done. 1,000 to 1,500 people every day, maybe a couple hundred can get on the trains. That means it's up to us to get these people out. It's just one example. The same thing happens, is applicable with the aid. And very frankly, the Ukrainian military also needs assistance. And whereas we have to be careful not to appear as gun runners and weapons dealers, usually when we head that way, there's also deliveries for the Ukrainian military. If this work is not done by people like me, it doesn't get done. Without knowing it, without intending it, I have developed these networks, this knowledge, and these skills. I uniquely came to play a role in this effort, as I explained, that puts me uniquely in a position to be of really big assistance. And it is a matter of life and death. And I simply cannot just sit here. I have inch by inch pushed my life aside as I've done this virtually full time. And now it's just a full commitment. I will go on the ground with people, we'll get trucks, and we will be doing this for as long as it takes. I have a ticket to come back in 6 weeks. I think it'll probably be longer, but we'll see. But in order to make this contribution, I need to be funded. Unlike the past where it's been just going to the border, I've just stayed in the tent village. I just lived there because there's people coming through the gate 24/7. So with my language ability, I can help these people. I have privately financed this to date. Now I need trucks. We need to purchase aid. And to make the difference that I know I can make, I need to be funded. So my request is, if you would prayerfully consider donating to Ben for Ukraine, the link is attached, the GoFundMe link. Consistent with your means, every little bit counts. If you are in a position to donate a lot, by all means, donate a lot. Every single dollar that you contribute will go to the humanitarian relief efforts, and every single dollar that you contribute translates to a human life. My request is that you simply prayerfully consider that and follow your conscience. Finally, I would simply state that although all of us made lasting friendships at the hilltop, on the hilltop, and had a whole lot of fun. By virtue of being graduates, we were there for 4 years, and as we all know, it is impossible to be at that beloved place for 4 years and not even accidentally, by osmosis, be shaped, informed, in a humanistic way, such that all of us, that the values of Georgetown are that we care for one another, we especially care for the least of our brothers and sisters, and I firmly believe that any graduate of Georgetown listening to this message shares the values that I do. I appeal to those values. I appeal to the spirit of humanity and the humanistic educational foundation that we all have by virtue of being a Georgetown graduate. For your help in support of the glorious people of Ukraine. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this. And my classmates who I haven't seen in a long time, God bless you. I love you. Thank you for all you do. You're very inspirational. Hoya Saxa, Slava Ukraini.